You're scared, go buy a dog. There's no reason to be scared right now. There's no reason to be scared about trying to build a business. We try to win each day, and if we can win that day and just get a little bit better. Starting that newsletter was honestly, it was so much fun. It really got my curiosity muscle moving. Basically, it's up to my eyeballs in a mess, and I don't see a way out of this. What I'm doing pretty much every day, starting something that's new, is my brain has never encountered these things before. And so it's simulating the outcomes that can happen. I want them to understand that, work ethic has a lot to do with what you do in life. 99% of the guys aren't up yet, and they're not going to driving range to practice. I will find a way, and I will work harder than everyone else. And I've never loved a January so much as this January. If I'm going to build this thing, we're going to build it together.
Starting as the guest on this episode of Halftime Heroes, former walk-on turned Division I golfer, creator of the Perfect Putt newsletter, and a man who is shaking up the golf world with his two bare hands, the founder of Hanna Golf, hailing from Mason City, Iowa, number 3, Jared
I believe it was your college coach said, if you're scared, buy a dog.
100%.
I'd love to understand what that means to you and what that's meant as you've, grown in your career and building a business.
We played a really interesting schedule in college. I would on probably the lowest funded Division I program in the country. I mean, it's got to be very close. And so, we were playing an interesting schedule, not great weather always. So, springtime we're going to southern Missouri and Arkansas, and you can get terrible weather then. And we weren't traveling to California and Phoenix and Florida often like a lot of the big schools. And so we ended up at all these I don't know, these tournaments where we're on tough courses and weather that was, not great. And so coaches tell us, you could have a hole that was, 480-yard par four. It's wet out. You get no carry, and you have out of bounds on both sides. And he would just say, buckle up your chin strap. And if you're scared, go buy a dog. There's no reason to be scared right now.
And how have you kind of applied that? I think it's, a lot of what I'm trying to do with this show is show people, sort of the athlete mindset and how you've taken it into business and your creative pursuits. So how has that showed up in how you've built Hana?
So, I mean, for us, it's like, there's no reason to be scared about trying to build a business. There are times that it is, I think, scary or overwhelming. But to have I guess, thought constantly that you're scared, there's no sense of doing it. And so just, our motto necessarily isn't send it, but we're going to err on that side. And so whether that's a different model or, a different release or, a collaboration, there's no reason to be scared. We're just going to shoot our shot and see where it ends up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've heard you talk a lot about your process and not necessarily setting these lofty year, 5-year, 10-year goals and more about like building in that day to day. So what does your process look like and what are you've started to build out this, it's yourself and a couple others, this core team. What is it that you're trying to instill in them from a system standpoint and in yourself to build this really from nothing?
Certainly a work in process. So it's much easier said than done. Trusting the process, I can kind of liken it to, golf. If your goal is if your primary goal is to go out and, win a tournament that week, most guys are going to have that goal in the back of their head, but, they have to go through the process of playing 72 holes. And so, there's no sense of getting ahead of yourself. And so we try to win each day, execute on our strategy for that given day. Mostly the same each day. It varies depending on what the workload looks like or the product mix looks like. But for us, we have our defined, goals for the day, and then we want to go ahead and execute as best as we can on those goals. And if we can win that day and just get a little bit better, and if we, end up learning something, that's a bonus along the way.
And what would a strategy look like for a single day in your world
hmm
right now?
Yeah, right now, so like January has been a really fun month for us. It's been a little bit different than previous months, but for us, we're trying to gear up with some new products. And so what that looks like is that's a lot of time in CAD, that's a lot of time in CAM, and that's a lot of time on our mills prototyping. And so, we'll come in, we've got orders we need to ship out the door. So, we have to take care of business, take care of the stuff that's priority. And that's kind of a given every day. And so what that looks like for us is okay, how many putters do we need to paint? How many putters do we need to grip? How many putters we need to ship? How many putters we need to shaft? That's kind of our given, and then what's on the mills that so
Yep.
if we've got orders for a certain product mix or x amount of putters, we got to get those putters in the mill, and then get those putters finished through our finish process, with belts and glass beads. And then the run over time, I guess, is where we can really have a lot of fun, what I think is a lot of fun, and being creative and come up with some different things.
Got it. Okay. I want to go and take maybe a step backwards to before you ever even got this business off the ground, and you're in grad school, and you had a professor. It sounds like was like, hey, you got to start writing online. And the choice of the name Perfect Putt maybe was, I don't know if coincidental or forward thinking on your part. Um, but tell me a little bit about starting out as a creator and how that has sort of shaped now what you're building as more of an entrepreneur.
So I think I've always been like a habitual tinker, but never had the guts to do something. And so, you know, I don't know when it was, 2021. Yeah, I was finishing an MBA, had elected to burn entrepreneurship. Instructor talked about writing online, and just, essentially why was it important to write online? This can be applied to other things, I think, with content. It can be applied to even podcasts, but his two main takeaways of writing online is like, okay, if you're gonna write a blog, then you have to actually have that blog published on a certain date. So you have to hold yourself accountable to publish something. And secondly is, what kind of feedback are we going to take from people on the internet that are going to read that? Now, uh, I mean, at the time, I didn't think anyone would read it. So I wasn't really concerned about that. But then, as the thing started to grow, I get feedback from people, how do you take feedback from someone you don't know that says what you just wrote sucks? And so it's understanding those things, understanding how to take criticism, and Perfect Bite, now purely coincidence, of the name with what we're doing right now. But yeah, starting that newsletter was honestly, it was so much fun. It really, got my curiosity muscle moving. And then, it was fun to try to build an audience online.
And it is interesting. Like I think you see it more and more in the world now. You see these creator brands that are launching, and
Mm,
if you look at a Jake Paul, or there's some of these brands that Emma Chamberlain, like they've built these massive audiences, and then they go and launch these
yep.
these brands. Um, it is interesting, obviously, like maybe on a smaller scale, but you kind of did the same thing. You spent years writing and building a community in the golf space, and how did that help when you did launch this thing that you had this audience of 10,000 plus people who are reading your stuff every day to then go and say, "Hey, okay, I actually just launched this and we're selling putters now."
Super small audience compared to what we've seen in other places. And I guess I'll start by this is like sometimes I think creator led things can be perceived as like a get rich quick thing. Like this is super easy. I can turn 7, 8 figures on something. For us, this was not the case. I sort of wish it was at times, but for me in writing online, and building relationships with a lot of people in the industry, and then also having the trust of people allowed us to, I think, sell our first 100, 200 putters. A lot of those orders came from people that have followed on. I've predominantly been on Twitter, followed me on Twitter, and then also, read Perfect Putt. And so that was super nice to have a jump start, if you will, in that, and kind of have something to leverage a little bit. And I think about it actually every now and then. It's like it would be really, really hard to start something without any audience, pre-built. And so those people have a lot of extra work just to get started. And I'm fortunate that I had that.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about your f- you know putting yourself out there, getting feedback from people online. You've also talked about, sort of your fear of failure. And again, putting yourself out there, you're taking a huge gamble with this thing. You're now, 3 years in. Um, how have you overcome that fear of failure? Because I think there's so many people that stop before they ever really even get started. And, you've been able to bully your way past that.
Yeah, I mean, I still do have a fear of failure. It's not near as bad as what it was in, spring of 2024 before I launched this thing, and was basically just up to my eyeballs in a mess. And I was like, I don't see a way out of this. I'm gonna have to find a W-2 job and sell everything that I have. And quite frankly, to be bluntly, for me, I work with an entrepreneurial coach, and I talk to her twice a month, and she's we've worked on a lot of stuff. I mean, she's essentially like a business therapist, and that has basically, I won't say rewired my brain, but it's given me a different framework of how we look at things. And, that has not been easy. So like when you're working with somebody, I learned pretty quickly is that, it's a lot of work on my end, outside of those 2 sessions that I talked to her, a month. And, it's been a year and a half since I worked with her. And, it's been a noticeable difference from, how I approach things from our mindset. And then, I think I've always known in the back of my head, like putters aren't super important. Like, we're not trying to, cure, a terminal disease or anything like that. And so, you know, with this, it's like if I'm, miserable, or overwhelmed or just have this huge fear of failure, then just this isn't for me then. And just to have that real, I think, introspective thinking that maybe I'm more suited for a job. And so, having that hard look in the mirror and say like, look, if you're not going to have fun with this, then, maybe you should try something different. And so it's been a really hard process. I still do have a little bit of fear of failure. There's no question about it, but not near as bad as what it used to be.
Yeah, that's cool. I never heard much of it like an entrepreneurial therapist or coach or, whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it. Like, what are some of those tools that you're picking up from those sessions and how do you apply those?
Yeah, so I mean, her name is Madeline Walsh, and I mean, really, really good. And I kind of started working with her by coincidence. She had written a blog, and then she interviewed me when I was writing Perfect Putt to be in the blog. And in that, she's like, "Hey, I'll help you out. With what you're doing with Hanna Golf." No one had known this at the time, but I was talking to her, and so really, I think what really stems from her is like, okay, what's working well, what's not working well. And basically it's just like golf, where it's like 95% mental. And so
Hmm.
how do we frame things? I still do have a problem with being too self-deprecating, have some confidence. Um, and then for me, a big thing is rumination and anxiety, which, if I have a thought, then that can ruminate and then just spiral out of control. And so, learning I guess the science behind rumination and anxiety is like, um, not to go too much in the weeds, but what's really helped me is like when we are doing something we don't know the outcome of it, our brain is naturally wired to come up with simulations to understand, is it a fight or flight response? And so that's normal. Now, when like us humans go too far down the rabbit hole on that, is we focus on the negative. And so, okay, what if I don't sell X, Y, Z this month? Then I run out of money, then the business is dead, and then you just have this rumination spiral.
Spiral. Yeah.
So it's understanding that, yeah, what checking with like my brain, okay, it's normal to have that simulation process, because what I'm doing pretty much every day, starting something that's new, is my brain has never encountered these things before. And so it's simulating the outcomes that can happen. Now, my brain just happens to tend to, I think like a lot of people, sometimes take the right hand turn, which can be, less optimistic than it should be. And so understanding that, I think, has really, um, really put me in a different mindset. And then, a whole host of other things. But, it's a lot of work trying to figure this whole thing out. But yeah, I mean, she's been nothing but great. And the business wouldn't be here, without her and her help. And then, it was an organic thing. I wasn't looking for somebody, but I was like at the time, like, this could really help me. I was in a bad spot in spring of 2024. I never had anxiety in my life before, and I had 2 panic attacks, and I'm like, what's
Yeah.
what's going on? So, it really did help, and it has helped quite tremendously.
Yeah, and I know there's a story of you, you worked, I don't know, whatever, 87 days or out of
Oh
90
yeah.
days or something, get yourself some shingles. So, like, does it feel like you're figured out a way to balance this a little bit more, or is it still, like, all consuming at this point?
No, I mean that. So shingles was, I think, a good thing that happened to me. Yeah, I got shingles last spring, and that came off of a new machine. Did a collab with Bridgestone. Did a limited release. Came out with a new putter and hired a full time person, and all those things coming together overwhelmed me. I was alone at the time, pretty much. Tyler was an intern, and he was working about 10 hours a week, and so no, I tried to do too much, and so understanding like, hey, look, I'm okay with working a Saturday. There's no question about it. Um, but maybe we shouldn't have to work every Saturday.
Yeah.
And so trying to be better about planning and scheduling and, understanding what we can and can't take on. I think we're in a better spot this year, but hopefully we continue to level up and we have to, maybe turn some stuff away or, we have to maybe throttle down a little bit. That's a good position to be in. I rather it sounds crazy. I differ maybe than a lot of people on this, but I rather be not busy enough than way too busy. Um, Way
Mhm.
too busy. We've been twice in 2025 and miserable. I mean, and I've also been to the point where it's been not busy, and I'd rather be in that spot.
Yeah. Uh, you mentioned Tyler and bringing on a full-time person, um, and, you're kind of taking on growth here. You're doubling the size of the company. You're building sort of, added I think interns over the time as well. Like, what has that been like starting to build a team environment around this? I also want to talk a little bit about your family wife, your wife,
Uh,
family life. Your wife has been so supportive. You've got kids whose
uh,
namesake is on the door.
uh.
But maybe talk about like how you've built this team around what was really started as like a one person blog, for lack of a better
Yeah,
descriptor.
that's a great way to put it. So, um, you know, I when I quit my job, my dad's like, I want to see your business plan. My dad's a retired CEO and a sales guy at heart. So, and he's also way too analytical. So he says, all right, let me see your business plan. And then like the first 2 years, it was just me. And as I'm getting into this thing and I have 1 mil in my garage at home, it's like, okay, this is not really going to happen. And then we launched in July of 24 and we sold 50 putters that first week. And I immediately said, like, I got to find some help. It's like, I need some help somewhere. And so, went to the local community college. They had a tool and die program. Um, it was like, hey, look, I'm looking for an intern for this school year. You know, what do you have? And then coincidentally, my mom's just a retired school teacher. And so she had taught Tyler in third grade. And so Tyler's mom is also a teacher. And so my mom and him know each other. And so it just worked out really well. He came into the shop for an interview that lasted all of 3 minutes. He had a good handshake, looked me in my eyes and said, I'm ready to get to work. And that was that. Um, I've hired, I don't know how many people in my life, hundreds. He's the best hire of my life. Um, Not even close. So, he's a good culture fit. He doesn't know much about golf, but he loves making putters. And I could ask him to come in at 2 in the morning on a Sunday and he'd be here 10 minutes later. So, he just wants to see this thing win. And, I'm very fortunate to have him on the team. And then, for us, we have a social media intern as well. Her name's Molly and she's in college and she plays college golf at Northern Iowa. And she just cold outreached me basically a year ago and said, "I'd love to help you on social media." And so we worked together a little bit last spring. She's in a different town than we are, so it was tough, I think, for us to really kind of hit our stride. Now we moved to Cedar Falls, Iowa, earlier in January. That's where Northern Iowa is, and so she started to help us out again, and she's working about 15 hours a week and really, taking hold of social media. What I really look for, or what we really look for, is I think people that are doers, and not afraid to make mistakes, take ownership of your work, take accountability, and have some fun with it. I know that's easy to say, but we try to give them the latitude to do that. So Tyler makes a mistake. If he breaks a probe, um, it's not a big deal. Like
Mhm.
it's $200, right? But he feels bad about it. I think it's a machinist thing. But I break stuff too. Like I mean, that's machining, it's manufacturing. We're gonna break stuff, and if we're not breaking stuff, then I quite frankly, I question, how much are we pushing the limit? How much are we trying to innovate? So, that's kind of where the team's at.
That's the halftime whistle. Proper spanking from the visiting side in the first half. Jared and the Hanna Golf crew lead 3-0. You have to admire these guys. They are just methodical, they're gritty, they will just straight up outwork you. It's pretty incredible that what started as a golf newsletter with 0 subscribers has turned into a boutique putter company churning out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of clubs every year. If I have one single takeaway from the first half, just one, it's that you have to have a bias for action. Jarrett, he burned the boats. He said there's no turning back, and he chased down a dream, and that's what makes Hanna Golf so special. We don't know how long we've got in this life, and so you have to really go after what you want. We're going to get right back to the second half action, but first we have a word from our, not a sponsor, but could be a sponsor. This ad has actually been submitted by Halftime Heroes fan Bobby from Texas, and I will be now reading it live on air for the first time. This was sent to me via invisible ink, so here we go. Bubble Climb. Want a full body upgrade? Don't book yourself a trip to Turkey for a hair transplant or a South American cruise for a sneaky BBL. Just pick up a case of Magna. This triple magnesium electrolyte blend fuels your natural energy levels, making it possible to completely change who you are as a person. Of course, you have to still do the whole wake up early, work out, eat right, and tracking your health while also doing your day job, paying your mortgage, taking your kids to soccer, doing the dishes, calling your mom, and getting a dog neutered part yourself. But hey, you'll feel better doing it. World champions, Olympians, and elite athletes use Magna to power their potential. And right now, average Joes with 37% body fat can too. Try Magna today. There you have it. Let's get back to the second half.
Yeah, there's no question about it. When I started Perfect Putt, the newsletter, I had one kid, and it was much different from a timing standpoint. I had one more time in my life. Started Hanna Golf with 2 kids, and then had our third in 2024, in August 24th. So right after we launched this thing, and it's really hard, but I think it's also like a motivator. Like my kids, my daughters, or my 6 and 3-year-olds, they come into the shop and they want to come into dad's shop, and they want to screw around in here, on Saturdays or Sundays. And so, it's a motivating factor to say, this is, something that we've all heard before, but like, you can really, I want to try to prove to them that you can do something if you put your mind to it. So they may not want to start a business when they get older, but they may want to be whatever, the best nurse in the world, or the best lawyer, or whatever it may be. And I want them to understand that, work ethic has a lot to do with what you do in life. And so, that's important to me. And then also my wife is, the greatest supporter on earth, and never asked about, hey, how much money did you pay yourself last month? Or, how are the bills doing, or anything like that. And, you know, Emily and I think, somebody gave us advice, and we got married, in today's age, I guess pretty young. We were both 24. And so, we were married, and, we had good jobs, and, we just saved a lot of money. We paid off our debt and saved our money. And, we were able to, I was able to take a risk because we did that in our 20s. And so, I owned part of the company that I was at before this. And so I had to pay out. And so, from a financial standpoint, I would like to be in a better spot, but we're not in a dire spot.
Right.
We're there's nothing to complain about. No one's going to feel sorry for us. So, that's been really helpful. But from a time standpoint, if I got to work on a Saturday or something, she's really supportive of that. I hate doing that, now that our kids are a little bit older than what they were a couple of years ago. But, it's just, I truly believe that if you have a spouse, significant other, whatever it may be, they have to be more on board than I think you are. She picks me up on days that I'm not necessarily thrilled about things. And, because without her, this thing doesn't exist. And so, she's been super critical for us. And it's been actually kind of a fun journey to walk it with her.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's cool to be able to build that like alongside your family. When I was going to ask, when is your son getting a putter or name on the, when are we adding him to the mix?
Yeah, he's not gonna be in the mix anywhere with his name on this company. And What I'll say, like if he comes to a point in life where he has to ask about it, then that's a good thing. That
Yeah,
means that we're
you
still
guys are
alive.
still going.
Yeah. So we'll figure it out at some point. But yeah, I mean, he's 18 months now, and so it's I probably actually you make a good point. I should probably make him a putter here.
I saw your daughters made one for your wife at one point too, so that's kind of
Yeah.
a fun little. That's nice.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to maybe give a little bit of advice to, people who are listening to this show. You started this thing now 3, 4 years ago. You started Perfect Putt, 4, 5 years prior to that. You got your MBA. Like looking back, 10 years prior. What would you tell yourself? I know you've said like I probably wouldn't do this again if I know what I know now. But where would you give yourself advice of like how to push things in a different direction?
I think the one thing that I come back to is I would have done this earlier. Uh, but it's like everything with people my age. I'm 36, and so I'm at the age where it's like you're in your 30s, you're trying to buy a house or whatever, and you're trying to have kids. And you're like, it's always when are we gonna have enough money? When are we gonna have money? And you talk to some great entrepreneurs out there, and it's like they just find a way to figure it out. And they never had a fear or like an irrational fear of money. And so for us bootstrapping this thing and not taking investor money or anything like that, um, is definitely challenging in that sense. And so I think I probably would have started earlier. I mean, I would have loved it. I quit my job when I was, I guess, 33, 34. I quit my job when I was 34 to start this thing. And, I think for us, for me, I would have preferred to start it at 30.
Yeah, I talked to somebody yesterday who kind of said the exact same thing. He's like, built this successful career in sports media. He's like, I had this idea. I was sitting on this idea for 4 years before I ever really like moved the needle. How do you drive sort of propensity for action? Like it seems like you're very action
Yeah.
oriented and driven by that. I think that's like one of the biggest challenges for creators, for entrepreneurs. Is like, yeah, you got all these ideas swirling in your head, but until you actually make the putter or start the blog or do whatever, it's not real. And so, how have you built that constant need for taking action?
Yeah, I mean, having a bias for action is something that we actually talk about in the shop. And so for me, you can go on social media and everyone's going to give you a framework. All these thought leaders, some have built something, some have never built anything in their life, but they're going to walk you. These are the steps you need to do. This is what I'll say is that everyone is different. Like everyone is different. Everyone's outcome is different. Everyone's situation is different. So you can't just follow this pre-planned template. For me, what I had to do, I told you earlier, I was kind of a habitual tinkerer. I had to quit my job. If I would have just done this as a side hustle, um, there's no way that I would ever have done it. Zero chance. I mean, I would have had that mill in my garage for, a couple months. I would tinker around with it. I would have never figured anything out. I had to figure it out. Like I was forced to figure it out or I was going to go back to find a job. And I did not want to do that. And also the failure thing is like, I don't want to fail. So I had to figure it out. So for me, I had to burn the bridge. Brett's on Twitter yesterday. Somebody basically outlined the whole framework of why you don't do that, why you start a side hustle. That's fine. Maybe it worked for them. Would never work for me. And I bet it would never work for a lot of people out there. A good buddy of mine, Tyler Johnson, started a golf company about the exact same time I did. He's right across the street from me in the shop. He had a side hustle for a year. And he did it as a side hustle for a year and a half. It worked for him. So, for me and taking that bias for action, I had to quit.
Yeah. It is a very athlete centric thing. I think you're competitive with yourself. You're like, trying to make little incremental progress every single day. What other things have you taken from your athletic background that you've now
Mm,
applied to be an entrepreneur? It just seems like I love talking to athletes because I think it's like you're just wired a little bit differently to compete. And so,
mm.
what are some things that you took, whether it's from college golf, playing sports growing up, that you now apply to your day to day?
I went to an NAIA school my freshman year. My goal in high school was to, play Division 1 golf, and that was my overarching goal that I worked at since I was pretty much 12 years old. Is I want to do that, and I wasn't talented enough, and didn't have enough money as a family to travel to these AJGA events to get noticed by coaches, and quite frankly, I wasn't prepared for that anyway. I would have gotten, I would have got my butt kicked, and so ended up at an NAIA school, which is a really good golf school. got so lucky that fall. I mean, I got a tremendous amount of luck that basically, 3 inches of rain changed my life, if that makes sense. And so, I ended up, playing really well that fall because I made made the ability to actually play. And so, then I was able to transfer out and find a Division I school and had a handful of offers and all out of state. I wanted to go to Drake, which was in Des Moines. It's where my wife was going to school, and we dated in high school, so I wanted to go to Drake, and they said no. Ended up at Northern Iowa, which, I definitely wanted to go there as well, but I'd rather have gone to Drake and, no scholarship. Not even I don't think it was even a walk-on spot. Coach just said, you can show up, you can practice with the team. You're not going to be on the roster on the internet. Career moded it when I got there and qualifying through 8 rounds. Finished fifth, actually, was academically ineligible for my transfer. So I missed the first tournament and then qualified for the second tournament, and I played in the top five ever since. And so, knowing that, I'm a huge underdog. I'm not as talented, but I will tell you one thing is that I will find a way and I will work harder than everyone else. And so, when I used to play in college, I would wake up. I mean, I would get my left foot out of bed in the morning, and I would say, 99% of the guys aren't up yet, and they're not going to the driving range to practice. And so that's really the ethos that I've lived on. Also has got me in a little bit of trouble, and we've talked about that earlier on the pod, is, I can overwork myself. And so, um, my thing is really, it comes down to work ethic. And that's been inherited from my granddad and my dad, and to me, it's the best trait that I inherited from my father.
That's awesome. You mentioned your granddad. A lot of your clubs in the
Mm.
arsenal are named after places that he lived. Talk a little bit about him and sort of the inspiration from him and your dad, who has the CEO and business roots, but also kind of the manufacturing roots as
Yeah.
well on that side of the family too. So tell me about those two men in your life and how they've impacted you.
Yeah, I mean, it's two interesting stories. So, I mean, my granddad was born in 1926 in El Reno, Oklahoma. We named all of our putters after cities that he had lived in his life, and grew up extremely poor, like a lot of people in that generation. 3-room house, 9 kids in Amarillo, Texas. He started working at 12, roofing houses, got struck by lightning. I mean, they survived the Great Depression. They had the quarantine for fever for 3 months. Then he got drafted after his junior year of high school. So he held back a grade due to due to quarantine from fever in their house. And so got drafted after his junior year of high school and went to Battle of the Bulge, which is the bloodiest battle. From a casualty side on the American side, survived it. Went back and went to college on the GI Bill. And he came from absolutely nothing. Probably he truly had the American dream. Was a sales guy his whole life. And so, sold stuff like for these random manufacturing companies, and, was able then to put my dad and my uncle through college. And then, that's that it just changed our family tree, not from like this generational wealth thing that you get from a money standpoint, but he took the arrows to go ahead and say, all right, I'm going to work really hard and I'm going to put my kids in a better spot. My dad then in turn, put me and my sisters in a better spot. So, my dad probably had one of the worst, my dad listens to most of the podcasts that we're on, and, he always gets a kick out of this. He doesn't love that it's out there, but I say it anyway. But he probably had one of the worst business deals of all time when so my dad in 2006 bought a company with a business partner that he had worked at since 1990. So he'd been there for 16 years, small manufacturing company in Iowa. And, 2006 happens. Well, it was he completely, the valuation was absurd. And then 2008 happened, and I mean, he grinded. I mean, I don't know
Hmm.
honestly how he did it, quite frankly. But unfortunately, then my dad was diagnosed with MS in 2012, and I look at that, from 6 to 12, and all that stress he was, putting his body through. And my dad, an incredible athlete, always took care of his body, but sleep's a problem. You got to sleep, and so not sleeping a whole lot, and that probably had something to do with it, but nonetheless, my dad still worked for 11 years with that disease, and he's kicked its ass. And so, um, I mean, just looking at my dad and my granddad and what they've done for me and my sisters has been awesome.
That's great. I know we got a few minutes left here. I just want to, kind of finish up with a couple other questions. I know you're not a big forward-looking guy, but maybe we'll ask a question that's a little bit more speculative. Like, where do you see the golf industry going? I think we've seen over the last 5 years just crazy growth in
Mhm.
golf on the heels of COVID. The simulator bays, like there's such an influx of YouTube golf. Like there's really just like this new world of golf happening. And as surround yourself in that space, like where do you see that world going, and what role does Hana potentially play in that new world?
From a macro standpoint, golf's in a great space. There are some micro issues with golf, and so like what we'll see in golf is we have a huge supply and demand issue. So public golf. And so, for us to grow golf, we have to have, more public golf courses. Not everyone can afford a country club or anything like that. But what we're seeing right now is most new golf course developments are, high end private retreats, or they're, high end public destination essentially. So, we're not building, public golf courses in Des Moines, Iowa, where it's a huge golf is a huge issue from a supply and demand standpoint. So what that's doing is it's increasing the green fees. And then it's at some point we will, it's just elastic. Um we will hit an issue where people stop paying for those green fees. And so if we can try to avoid that, I think we'll be in really good shape. What we have avoided so far is the golf course development that we had in the early 2000s. With building a golf course comes with a neighborhood. And so we have avoided that, and there is this point where you don't want to overbuild, and I understand that. And it's also very expensive and takes a lot of time to build golf courses. But that would be my major concern right now. But if you look at the two fastest growing demographics in golf, which are juniors and then females, I mean, to have those, we're building a foundation on a really solid demographic of folks where it's COVID, it was the COVID bros out playing golf, the 25 to 30-year-olds that would work from home that would go out and play. If that was the predominant, grower of golf, we'd probably see a little bit of a bubble burst. But, those people play golf, right? But the primary driver was the juniors and the females. And I think that's a great opportunity to build the foundation on.
Cool, it's great. Maybe I'll wrap with this question. What motivates you to get out of bed every morning and keep building this brand? And we talk about the future, and maybe we won't speculate of like where you take this thing someday. But what motivates you to keep plugging ahead and working through that grind?
I mean, what honestly motivates me is I haven't enjoyed a January in Iowa in like, I don't know. I've never enjoyed a January of work since I've graduated from college. I've honestly hated it. I've never loved a January so much as this January. And I truly love coming into work every day. And what motivates us, I think, is the creativity and the challenges that we have ahead. I mean, there's a lot of great putter makers out there. Um, but can we find a way to make our mark? Can we prove ourselves that we actually have a chance in this thing? Big golf's controlled by, a lot of advertising dollars, and rightfully so. I think that they probably earned that. But can we find a way to make our path in this thing? And, the challenges with that, I think, are certainly motivating.
I love it. All right, Jared, if people want to support, kind of check out what you're up to, where can the listeners of this get their hands on a putter?
Yeah, hannagolf.com. So it's HANNA golf.com. Social media handles are Hanna Golf Co. So yeah, they can find us there, and my email's all over the website. People call me and people text me and people email me. That's my favorite part. One of my favorite parts of doing this is actually talking to people that are interested in buying putters and see what makes them tick, and what's their story. There's some cool stories out there, and I always enjoy hearing them.
You have a pretty amazing use of your community and audience. You feel like you're always getting feedback from all over the place.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I think building in public is certainly it has its cons. It also has its pros. But if I'm going to build this thing, we're going to build it together.